Good here, all.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Okay. Hello and welcome, everyone. We're back for episode 2 of the Eng Hiring Podcast with Rich again.
Hey there.
So we're gonna talk about a bunch of different topics today. But Rich, I kind of want to just start off, like, hear from you. Like, how was your day? How's the weather up in Seattle?
It's not raining right now, and actually looking out the window here, I see some patches of sun, so that's really good. That's it's been Seattle's known for rain, and it hasn't disappointed here in the last month. So looking forward to some dry weather here.
We had a bit of rain here, so I'm in Oakland right now, in the Bay Area in California, and we had a bit of rain the past couple of days as well, which is unusual for us. And very good, because it means that there's going to be fewer fires, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to start off with this kind of big burning question on everybody who's hiring, whether it's for a startup or for a bigger company. It's like, how long does it take to hire somebody, right? So I hear like CEOs say, "Oh, we have to get started hiring right now. Like, we have to hire faster." So how do we even set expectations with that, right? Like, how long does it take to get a candidate through from like the moment you message them on LinkedIn to get them to them like working at your desk, or at their desk? Like, how long does one expect?
Yeah. Great question. I think that the market for talent, especially talent that I focus on, engineering, product, and design talent, especially for startups, very, very hot, very competitive, and there's a lot of movement, right? A lot of people are thinking about changing jobs. A lot of companies have received a lot of additional investment, or their businesses are growing, and so they're looking to hire. So really hot. I think I'm gonna not answer your question directly, which I will. I promise. Yeah. I'll come back to it. But I want to sort of talk about a MetaPoint, which is always be hiring. And so one of the best ways to improve your hiring success is to actually have a hiring process running all the time. And that doesn't mean like you actively are interviewing candidates all the time, but you're actively sort of cultivating a network of people that you can activate. The worst thing in the world, like any recruiter will talk to you about, like, hey, there's like a cold start problem, right? Someone says like, oh, I need this position. And it's like, okay, well, now we have to like do a job analysis, and then we have to train the recruiter team what to work for. And then hopefully maybe there's some like sort of lukewarm or medium warm leads that they have. Really, we're starting from zero. And so like, it takes a while to get that sort of engine up and running. Everything that you can do to have that sort of network that's warmer that you can tap into is going to be advantageous to you. And so that gets into like candidate relationship management things, and like, hey, how do you think about like, hey, how am I going to have a bench of talent, or how am I just going to be connecting with people in the industry, et cetera, if I'm like, an engineering manager, a design manager, et cetera, so that when I have a position, I can just like sort of tap my network and grease this process, make it easier.
So when you were saying that, it's sort of, and this is the first time I've probably ever said this, I think the genius of Elon Musk kind of stands out, which is that by being this kind of, figure on Twitter and generally in social media, he's gaining this brand presence that just ensures that there's a bunch of young, talented people always kind of looking to work for his company. So he can ensure, like, in some ways, like his social media presence, it does what you're saying. It keeps the candidate relationship, or it keeps people on the bench, because there's always going to be like 1,000 more people who want to work for SpaceX or Tesla or whatever else. And yeah, I guess that like I kind of put that together, which is like part of the cold start might be nobody knows about your company.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. And you've got, on the other side, you've got these like celebrity CEOs almost like going out there and like kind of passively just building up more and more like popularity for their brand. And that just means your job recruiting is totally different. You're gonna have different problems, right? Than if you had the cold start, right? You have almost too many applicants, but
that's a great point. I think that, so you want to be a talent magnet, and you don't have to be Elon Musk, and you don't have to have a bajillion Twitter followers in order to do that. You can do it in a way that's authentic to you. And I also think that the other thing that maybe he or other people have a problem with is, there's two types of people in this world, right? There's people who want to work at a successful company and people who want to work to make a company successful. And I think that a problem that they probably have is that there's a lot of people that are just like, oh, I'm very attracted to the idea of working at this, sort of prestige company because it'll be sort of good for me and good for my career, good for my prospects. Yeah. I'm not saying that you should like never hire those people, but if you're a startup, I definitely try to not hire those people. I try to hire people who want to work and make a company successful, like the grinders, the people who are sort of there because they either believe in the mission or they believe in the type of work that they're doing or they believe in the people, that kind of thing, rather, because that'll endure, right? Like the second there's like a hit piece in the press or something like this. Remember, I worked at Twitter for 4 years. And so like, I would have to deal with people that would come in and like, they would be upset and want to leave, Twitter because they went home for Thanksgiving and their parents like, read in the news that Twitter wasn't doing so well. And like, they couldn't be seen by their, parents or friends or family to be not working at a not successful company. Mm-hmm. And when this first happened to me, I actually, like, I didn't understand where they were coming from, but this is like very important to some people. And so I think you have to really, this sort of took a little tangent in our conversation as we often do, but I do think that like, when you think about talent and talent networks, I think that the work that you do should be sort of engaged in your community, and that community, we're all remote. Like when there wasn't a pandemic, there could have been local meetups, there could have been things that you can do locally. All that stuff exists now, but it's like in Slack and Discord and other places. There are places that you can go that you can connect with practitioners for learning, mentoring, networking type of opportunities. These are hotbeds for you to be building up sort of a warm network, just simply not by saying, hey, come and work with me, but like, hey, here's what's going on in my company. Here are the challenges that I'm working on. Here are the opportunities. Like, what do y'all think about this? What do you think about that? And I think that is like sort of how I would think about that warm talent network. Now,
leading a bunch of almost like giving talks at conferences might be a great.
Sure. Oh, great example. Yeah.
Right? And I think that like there are certainly companies out there. There are a lot of conferences out there that like I've never even heard of that are so niche, right? I used to work in remote sensing for a while, and within remote sensing there are like niche upon niche upon niche, and so there's conferences of 200 people who get together and talk about like what it's like to work with one particular satellite. And just sort of being in that space for a while, people just get to know you, and all of a sudden the people who know your, like they already kind of know your work, like it can be this really powerful like agent for recruiting later.
Absolutely. And so, all right, so we talked about, that warm network, right? And always be recruiting. Yeah. And, I think also if you like, as you do recruiting at scale at a larger organization, if we had to say no to somebody because they were maybe not at the level of seniority that we needed them, or like our role that we had to close the role or something like this, right? We need to hire one person and we got like 5 qualified applicants. We would always have a list. Now, there are plenty of pieces of software that do candidate management and things like this. We were doing this like in a spreadsheet. And this was like sort of hey, let's actually make a plan and have a structure to like reach out to these people like quarterly, keep track of like where they went to in their career, et cetera, because that is so much better than starting from, opening up LinkedIn Recruiter and typing, software engineer, Boston Mass, and like starting, right? Like having people that know you, know the interview process, get the context, that is like super important. So that's the last thing there. Now it's like, okay, in today's market, like how long does it take to hire? And of course, like it depends. Now I do a lot of recruiting for Series C to Series A and a little bit bigger startups, and mostly software engineers, product managers, and designers. And I will tell you at the sort of senior to mid-senior level across all those roles, you're looking at basically for each role, I think you're doing pretty well if you're doing on average about 50 expertise interviews per role that you are hiring for. And by expertise interviews, I mean, like, if you think about the interview process like a funnel, I don't mean 50 recruiter screens. I don't mean 50 hiring manager calls. I mean, 50 people that you're like, hey, we think that this person is qualified enough that we want to, back when we were, again, going on-site, we would want to bring them for an on-site interview, and we would want to actually meet with them and make an assessment about their expertise. If it's a designer, this would be like the design portfolio review. If it's a software engineer, this would be the technical interview that they would do. And
so
yeah,
kind of like put more of a concrete numbers around that. Like, like at Google, we used to do like 4 on-site interviews per person, right?
Yeah.
So you're not saying like 4 of those don't count as 4 in your calculation here. You're saying like it's 50 people.
Right, it's 50 people, right, exactly, yeah,
So what you're saying is that you basically need to do about nearly 200 interviews, or 200 hours of your engineer's time.
If you're doing 4 rounds, yeah, for
if
sure.
You're doing 4 rounds the way Google does, right? But okay, you could do so you could do just one, but another way to think about it is 50 hours of engineer time, right? If you're just doing 1 hour rounds.
That's right.
And so that's basically like, that's more than a week's worth of full-time work to expect out of an engineer to get another engineer, right?
That's right. That's right.
And so like that's interesting in and of itself, because to me that doesn't actually sound like a lot, right? Like right away you're like, well, that's great. I'll just put one engineer on. I'll just put one engineer on for like a month and a half, and I should have 6 more engineers, right? Like
right.
That's how it works.
Except you have to rehire the engineer who quit because all they've been doing is interviewing, right?
Exactly. So I think that's something I do want to get into, which is like part of the reason why it takes so long maybe is that you can't actually do interviews back to back. It's really draining. And so the question, and so it becomes like a question of, what does real interview capacity look like for your company, right? Whatever company it is, whether it's a startup or whatever. How often can you actually pull engineers in? Could you interview 2 or 3 people a week? Like, and is that like a good upper limit? I'm sort of asking like a gut check from you. Like, if you have a company of like 10 engineers, how many interviews should be getting done every week?
Right. That's a great question, and I would love to like if I was working with a client, like we break out the spreadsheet and we do some math and things like this. I'll tell you that you don't want to hire above a sustainable pace, and the reason you don't want to hire above a sustainable pace, and one of those things I can't imagine I have to say, is that it's going to burn those people out. But then also there's an absorption rate in your organization, right? And so like, you don't want to be in a situation where you hire a bunch of people and then they have a bad onboarding experience, or you can't make them productive, because all of a sudden, like, hiring is a continual process. It doesn't stop when you just like make people offers. You have to like get them onboarded, and like if you're growing very quickly, your onboarding regimen is probably not great, and so on and so forth. So it becomes like a whole organization optimization process. I could tell you that we did blitzes when I was working at Twitter, where we said like, hey, to fund this very strategic effort, we're going to hire 50 or 60 or 70 engineers in like a month, right? Like, or in maybe 60 days or something like that, right? And in order to do that, you just have to treat it like any other business problem. You're like, okay, like you back out what the math is, and then you figure out like, okay, we're just like you did, like, hey, we have to spend all these hours. The first thing that you realize is you're like, okay, we have to make some trade-offs and optimizations. Most companies give too many interviews. Like four rounds of interviews is like, and again, Google has done research on this. It's not public, and I don't know it off the top of my head. There's what's the efficacy of the 3rd and 4th interview? Like how much smarter are you getting about whether this person is going to be a good fit? A lot of times people do these extra interviews because they're trying to solve a different problem. They're like, hey, we want everybody on our team to meet any new person that we hire, and we don't know how to like do that, and so we'll just like make them interview them, and like that's a very bad idea. And then you're not blowing up your thing. The other thing that we did that I thought was that people who are trying to scale this up have to do is sequencing, and just say like, hey, Wednesday is interview day, right? And like that, and like basically we try to get all the candidates to come. I mean, this is now easier because it's on Zoom or Hangouts or something like this. We try to get everybody to do that on a Wednesday. We try to say like, hey, we'll start earlier, stay later, whatever the time zone situation is. But we basically try to say like, hey, we're just going to try to do it all in one day. And that can help, right? Because you basically can plan, if you plan an event and you block the time, you can actually plan around it. Where a lot of the problem I've had with hiring creative and technical people and asking creative and technical people to be involved in the hiring process is that you impose a manager schedule on your makers, right? And they're getting like, oh, you know, this like 15-minute thing 3 times a day on their schedule, and they're like, I feel like crap at the end of the day because I wasn't able to like get into my design work or my programming work or my you know, my writing work or talking to customers or whatever. Yeah, I lose all my focus time. So batching and synchronizing and working with your recruiting staff to like do that, I think is a big uplift when you are scaling. But that takes, like, again, whole organization commitment, because like if you're just like the engineering manager and the hiring manager is like, hey, this is what I'm doing, I'm just going to hit you with meetings, like that's, you know, it's gonna be tough. Yeah,
it's really disruptive, and and you're gonna lose that engineer, right? If you just make them do a month and a half of interviews. So I think there's a couple of interesting points that you've touched on. So one is absorption rate, right? And it's almost like you have this funnel inside your head of like all the way from a person who has listened to you or somebody from your company at a conference, right? And then they kind of walk the recruiting path all the way in. They do the interviews and then they get onboarded, and then there's like, and the actual onboarding process is also, right, in your mind, a part of the overall recruiting process.
Absolutely.
Part of your absorption rate and how long, and whether everything that we did before just gets thrown away or not, right? Essentially.
Right.
And I think that's really fascinating, right? I don't think that many companies go and look at their actual absorption rate, like how many of their incoming class gets retained, right? Like that might not be something they have metrics on, but it's something they probably would appreciate having metrics on if they're big enough, right?
Absolutely.
And if you're small enough, right, like these types of problems might surface, might simmer for a while, and then will kind of surface all at once because there's just like going to be a bunch of fed up engineers who leave 6 months later, you know, after getting maybe some work done. And that's another thing, I guess, that folks can keep an eye on, and that adds a bunch of, like, churn adds a bunch of time to your recruiting, essentially, right?
Well, right. It's waste, right? Because like you could have the best front door recruiting process in the world, and then if you fail to like onboard or activate the people that you're hiring, you know, it's a big problem. I think that I can't remember who said this, not Deming, but somebody was saying, maybe Charlie Munger, where they were talking about Jack Welch at GE, and he was like, oh, you know, we have like they call it a yank and rank system. So they stack rank everybody and they cut the bottom 20%. And he called them dead wood. And he said, and I think maybe it was Charlie Munger, he was saying, you know, it's fascinating to me because when you call these people dead wood, one of two things is true. Either they were dead wood when you hired them, right? In which case your hiring process is messed up, or they were live wood when you hired them and you fucking killed them, right? Like, and so, but that's like the core of what this problem is that like you have to optimize sort of both sides of this thing. It's not enough to just have a world-class hiring process. You have to really engage people and retain people and do all these things. And so I always, you know, counsel people to think about like, hey, what success looks like healthy and productive long-term employees, not offer acceptance rate. And that goes back to like how you're measured as a recruiter at an organization, how you're measured as a manager, et cetera. Like the metrics need to be sort of holistic. And that's tough because like human beings are really bad about rewards and improving systems that have like distance and time and space. Like between the time I make somebody an offer and the time I find that they're like, you know, not delivering on expectations it could be a year, right? Like that could be a really long time. That's a very hard cycle to learn from and improve, especially if you are a small company that's growing rapidly.
Even when we talk about it, hiring and retention do kind of come up as different topics, right? And like hiring is one of those things where you might have a centralized pipeline, but then retention is considered almost the fault of the particular manager who is managing that person, right? And that might be, you know, that might be fair, it might not be fair. But the whole idea is that like perhaps there are collective problems, right, that a whole company might have across several hiring managers that are related to onboarding and to retention. And I think that, so this is one of those things that I think has also led a lot of engineers to leave their jobs. And I've seen this in India, for example. So I don't know how much you're following the market there, but engineer wages have at least doubled, right, in the past year, like since Corona happened. And I think a big portion of that is that a bunch of people went back home, and they ended up, having much lower cost of living and much fresher air to breathe and all of that. And then they were like, why am I putting up with this toxic work culture for this much? And they just sort of left. And then the wages started to rise because people were like, oh my God, we need to ramp up our hiring. What's the one lever we can pull, right? And money is the one lever that's very quick to pull. But I think what I would love to educate people on and get people more excited about is, you can get better at your hiring process itself. You can get better at your retention process as well. And maybe you can do that as quickly as just throwing a bunch of money at the problem. Or you can do that, you can do it very easy, like you can just do a few easy steps, right? And then a year from now, you'll just have a much more retentive organization.
Absolutely. And it's low hanging fruit. Like you would not believe the number of organizations that just don't put in the effort, right? They just don't seem like they give a shit, right? And that kind of thing is cheap to free, and it makes a huge difference in both acquisition and retention. And I think it's just one of those things where it's not, I don't have the answer for why people don't do that, but I do think that it's related to the fact that they don't think about, they're not systems thinkers, right? They're not thinking about this thing holistically. They're just thinking about hey, how do I get the next engineer onto my team? How do I get my close rate up? How do I do this? How do I do that? Rather than 100%. Hey, what's the end game? The end game is we have an awesome team and we build awesome product for customers and they love us and we make a lot of money, right? How do we stay focused on the end game, right?
So the part of this that I keep coming back to is candidate experience. And we talked about it a little bit in the last episode as well, about how the time to offer is something that big companies cannot nail that part of the candidate experience. It's very, very hard for them, right? Because they're just bureaucratic in that way. Startups can move faster. And I think the time to offer bit is something where it's so interesting, right? This market we have now is saturated with job postings, and there are not enough engineers. Everywhere I hear, just people saying there are not enough engineers, right? And this wasn't always the case, right? And I think that but we are here now, and so the question is how can small companies compete and just get that candidate experience much better, right? So I'd be curious to hear from you, what are some first of all, what was candidate experience back when 10 years ago or 15 years ago, and then how is it different now, right?
So let's see. Time is such a hard thing for me. So I think uniformly there are people out there that are very, very good at making great candidate experiences, and mostly people are neutral to bad at it. And I think that if I had to say one thing, to take away from this idea is we have to do an internal mindset shift. If you want to change behaviors, you're able to look at what are the underlying untested assumptions here. And I think that at least in the US, we're carrying, many of us, this unrecognized assumption that hey, people should be lucky that we are even talking to them, where they should be lucky to have a job, right? And that is very true if there's an economic recession, and certainly that was sort of a mindset, I think about it theory X management, that is sort of deeply rooted in American culture. But that's totally unhelpful, first of all, in this market where it's inverted, right? They're definitely, the candidate has all the power. But market-wise or not, I think that it's much more of a mindset shift that the manager should take and say hey, listen, I should trying to find the people that are the best people for my role at this time, and I should be lucky to find them and work with them. And I'm going to try to shift my internal mindset to be sort of pro candidate, pro those people. And then I think that kind of mindset is going to result in little shifts in behavior about how often you follow up with the candidates, how often, what is the structure of the communication email? Do you give them feedback, et cetera? In a personal story, when we were doing Crashlytics, we were maybe 5 people at the time, and we were in like squatting illegally in a like we had rented like an apartment in an apartment building that was definitely not an office, and like somebody next door would get stoned and play the trumpet like in the middle of our workday. Like yeah, like so that's like the context. And this woman came to interview for an Android engineering position, and she was great, and she had parked her car, I don't know, around the block in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And we interviewed her, she left, and we like looked at each other and we're like, yep. And then I just took out my phone, I called her, and I was like, hey, we want to give you the job, and here's what it looks like, and we'll send you the paperwork. And she's like, I haven't even gotten to my car yet. Like, I was like, well, just turn around, come back, we'll just like do it right now. And she was just blown away. That's what I teach people. I was like, hey, aim for that. Like maybe you can't do that, like whatever. And also people aren't going to offices or apartment buildings for job interviews, but like aim for that. And if you back that out, why was that possible? Well, one, because we were small, but two, because we had a really good set of criteria that we knew what we were looking for. And so, and we were able to objectively look at that. So like at the end, we sort of had like a checklist, and we said like, hey, here's our checklist. Does this person meet all of the things, both want from what people call culture, but I call like work preferences, like the way that they like to work, the way we like to work, and expertise. Like this person was an Android engineer. Did they have all these things? Yes. Okay. So the decision was very easy. If you we teleport into any company's hiring decision meeting anywhere in the world, that's not the situation. The situation is anxiety, right? Like people are like, I don't know, this person, this and that. And like, there's a lot of noise, and there's a lot of just sort of general angst about it. It's hard, but move from that kind of mode to like, hey, how do we sort of take a set of criteria, look at this candidate against that criteria, and then, in the Thinking Fast and Slow, they talk about this process that Daniel Kahneman did with the Israeli army. At the end of that process, so you have the data and you have the candidate, and they say, close your eyes and imagine, this candidate doing this job. Like, what do you think? So it's like, that's the point at the end, to add intuition. Don't let intuition come in earlier. Take the data first, do the intuition, but be rigorous, I guess, for lack of a better term.
And the other part I hear in that too is like, be synced up with your team, right? Like
true.
It's surprising how many times you might end up with a bunch of people in the company who are discussing a candidate, and they realize they actually have different expectations from this candidate. Right?
Yes.
And so that's a great thing. So I want to respect your time. I feel like the big thing I want to talk next time is it's almost like the pro people hiring process, right? Just be very pro person, and there's a portion of it that's also, what does this role require? But what I heard from your story specifically is like, you were just really pro people. You were synced up with your team, and you were like, hey, this person in front of us, do we want them? Yeah, okay, let's give them that good news right away.
Right. Right.
And so I would love to dive into that next time with you. Just really get into what it means to be a pro people hiring manager.
Sure. And I think you made a very good point that we should talk about next time, which is it's elusive, but how do you get alignment with your team, right? Like, how do we make sure that like when we're interviewing people, we can talk about some horror stories, things like that too, because that's always fun to talk about. But like when we're interviewing people, let's make sure everybody understands like what we're hiring this person to do. What do we want, right?
Yeah.
So important, and it makes things faster. All right. Until next time.
All right. Thanks so much, Rich. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.